Anyway, we're out here on a August morning. It's a little after 9 a.m. and the weather has been frightful this past month and a half. We've had very few breaks from the heat, and some people might say, well, you've had the lows. Well, the lows have been hot too. Here in the panhandle of Florida, the highs are in the 90s. The lows are just barely in the 80s. So our temperatures change from the high to the low only about 5 to 8 degrees, which is a little bit, which would be overwhelming if we didn't have air conditioning in the house. So I'm very thankful for air conditioning. But anyway, we live in a microclimate here in Destin, Florida, which is really interesting. The camera's actually facing kind of west-northwest, just a few miles, maybe 12 miles to the north over here, and 12 miles to the west. They do not have completely surrounded by bay on one side and Gulf of Mexico on the other side, and that actually keeps our temperatures at least 5 degrees cooler at the highs of the day. And so weather is really interesting. I think weather is really interesting. You get these little areas like this. Suddenly, this little place is just been perfect weather all summer. We have hit 95 degrees, maybe twice. I think it's once, but maybe twice this year so far. And just over there, I was just talking to a gardener from Fort Walton Beach, the next town over, and she was talking, and I said, fortunately, we've only hit 95. And she said, no, I remember 100 degrees a few times, and I had to remember, oh, wait, she's over there in Fort Walton Beach, completely different area. I was like, okay, yes, you have had it. And so all her tomatoes have deceased. And that we'll get to the tomatoes here later. We have some tomatoes over here in the front and side garden, which we're at. But yeah, so just by 10 miles. And I think it's interesting, you hear another good example is when people are in high elevations. Just go a few miles down the mountain, completely different weather. In Arkansas, our cabin, we were at high elevation. Okay, it was 1,560 feet. And our weather was completely different than 2 miles later when we're at just a little over 1,000 feet. And so, yeah, these microclimates, we talk about growing zones, and growing zones technically are quite irrelevant for vegetable gardening, because growing zones has to do with winter temperatures, not summer temperatures. And so those summer temperatures vary. And so when you're looking for what you're going to grow, you got to be sure to test and check out, research what's going to do good in your area. And as we've been covering in our small space gardening series, one of the first things we talked about is there's so many different kinds of so many different plants. Tomatoes, for example. Some tomato cultivars, that's what they call them, cultivars, are more heat resistant than others. And so you don't want a cultivar that's not heat resistant at all if you're living in a place like this. Now, you go over there 10 miles over, it doesn't matter what tomato you grow, they're not going to last in 100, 110 degrees. So you got to be careful about what you plant and when you plant, and that's the other big thing we talk about in our small space gardening series. I keep pointing that way because that's where our first little tomato plant is. You'll have to go see the series to see that. But anyway, it can also change your season, because if you're trying to grow tomatoes and you have a very hot summer, you're not going to be able to grow them. You have to grow them maybe you have a long spring and a long fall. Well, suddenly you have 2 growing seasons you can grow tomatoes. And I did not take advantage of that. I had a volunteer tomato this past spring. We have squirrels playing in the trees all over us, so you might hear, whoo, they are going crazy. I think they must be little Randy. But anyway, Last year we had a volunteer tomato that started in February or March. You'd have to go back and look at the garden tours for the raised beds, but that thing produced really great. It was our first producer for the first part of the summer, and I need to take advantage of that more often. I need to get my tomatoes in the ground a lot earlier. Started in February, and we started them late this year, and we were trying to grow over the summer, and they all started dropping their leaves, their buds, because it was too hot. The beans have stopped producing, which is a little discouraging, but we're watching the weather forecast closely, because eventually it's going to start dropping off. The temperature is going to ease off a little bit, and we'll be doing better. Can't wait, because this heat is getting a little bothersome. Right now it's nice out here. It's upper 80s. The other part of it, I mean, we've been having heat indexes the same as everybody else because we are so humid. Imagine, no matter which way the wind, well, in this case, barely blows, you're getting humidity either off the Gulf or right now off the bay. And that's creating more humidity. So we are actually a little more humidity than the other side of the bay, just 10, 12 miles over there, which just blows my mind sometimes. So anyway, let's get on with a garden tour, and we're going to start in the same place as usual. A lot of things have grown over since the last garden tour 4 weeks ago. In fact, 4 weeks ago, things were heading this direction, but whew,